So this is a challenging passage. I'm not sure what correlation there is between the difficulty of the passage is and how well the sermon is, but either way, I am sure many preachers struggle with how to preach this particular gospel text. There are certainly many interpretations to prove just that, its difficulty. The passage here alludes to Jesus needing some rest and relaxation, needing some time away from the crowds. This is certainly one of those passages where we encounter the very human side of Jesus. Now, in the previous passage that we heard last week, Jesus had just had a run-in with the Pharisees about specifically purity laws and how they're used to exclude people. So I imagine after this difficult confrontation, he is looking for some just quiet time alone. And I'm sure many of us, like me, find this text odd, frustrating, and possibly disappointing to hear Jesus call this woman and people like her, that is a Gentile, a dog. I certainly empathize with this brave woman, wanting to do whatever it takes to help her daughter who needs help. She ends up prostrating herself in full submission and worship to Jesus, only to have him respond in such an awful way. She doesn't get a rebuke, but rather an insult. So yes, this passage is difficult. You see, this Syrophoenician woman is an outsider, a Gentile, and Jesus makes sure that she knows that. Let the children, that is the children of Israel, be the first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Now, this is where many scholars disagree. Some say that Jesus was testing the woman, testing her faith. Others say that what we see here is a very human side of Jesus, for he was both fully divine and fully human. I don't know. Perhaps just a cranky human part of him came out. I can relate to that since I just moved this past week and I was very cranky, just ask my daughter. So I get needing a break and I get being exhausted. Or maybe he didn't quite understand the scope of his mission. Maybe it was all these things. We cannot be sure, but we do know this, that when the brave woman responds, "Sir, even the little dogs under their table eat the children's crumbs," Jesus' only response is to agree and to heal her daughter. Immediately following this healing story, Jesus goes into the region of Decapolis, another Gentile territory. And here a deaf man is brought to Jesus. They brought him a deaf man who also had an impediment of speech and begged him to lay hands on him. You see, he too was an outsider. This time, Jesus immediately takes the man away from the crowd and performs the miracle. And immediately his ears are opened. At that time, physical impairment or illness also meant that people were cut off from society and the community at large. So when Jesus healed people, he not only healed them physically, but he restored them fully into the life of the community. So what has this story got to do with us? And so here's where I share a video that stole my heart that I saw on YouTube. So I'm going to describe it to you. The video shows a woman as she returns from work at the end of her day and she's entering her apartment building. It seems everyone that she encounters along the way is busy on their phones or with their heads down, sort of focused on their own lives. We can all relate to that. Everyone ignores each other on the elevator and the ride up to her floor. As the elevator clears, everyone pushes past her to enter hurriedly into their own apartments, never acknowledging each other. You know that feeling when you're in the elevator and you kind of just don't look at folks? Well, that happened. And then as she enters her own apartment, her own daughter is on the computer with the headphones on. So it's at this time in the commercial that the song starts playing in the background. You've heard that song. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. I love that song. So it's at this point that she grabs her kitchen table and she carries it into the hallway, and her daughter notices, so she stands up and starts helping her mom. And so they set up the whole dinner with chairs and everything, tablecloths in the hallway, and they sit and wait. And they awkwardly wait for a bit until the elevator dings open and a man and a woman and a child, a young girl, exit, and they're invited to join them in the middle of the hallway, in the apartment. So others hear this commotion in the hallway, and so they exit their apartments and they join the dinner. And so then more tables and chairs are added, so it starts filling up the whole line of the hallway. Smiles ensue, an Asian family, a Muslim woman, and a young girl. Plates are passed, conversation is had, and much joy is expressed in the scene. Towards the end of the 3-minute video, it's a short video, a young girl who is on one end of the table goes underneath the table because she can't pass on either side and crawls underneath the table all the way to the other side, and she knocks on the door to the apartment where there is an elderly man who is seemingly alone. He then disappears into his apartment and exits with a bottle of wine and a loaf of bread to share with the rest that are gathered in the hallway. Now, the caveat of all this, of course, that this is a commercial for a Canadian grocery store. It is. You can Google it. But it spoke volumes to me. It's easy to sit in our homes here in Austin and look out at the rest of the world and see only threats, only enemies, only people who are different from us, and thus bad or other. It's easy to bury our heads and just ignore everyone, especially today. With all the ugly rhetoric that we hear all the time, you just want to drown that out. With all the recent injustices we see, even from our own political leaders, just makes me want to scream. With the COVID fatigue that we're all feeling. It's easy to bury our heads and to disengage and disconnect from the world and just ignore each other, or even worse, lash out in anger or frustration. When our spiritual and physical well is dry, it can be a comfort to disconnect and to disengage, to ignore those who perhaps we should be reaching out to. And just like Jesus' contemporaries, we're possibly quick to draw a line in the sand around us. I don't care if you want to think of a physical boundary like a country's border or even a political party border, any border that we have erected because someone doesn't think like you or me. However, it's only in crossing over those borders and those lines with that same willingness as Jesus had to rethink our own prejudices and preconceptions, that we begin to grow. Just like Jesus did here in this gospel, into a more mature sense of our self and the discipleship as people of faith. Jesus' confrontation with the Syrophoenician woman is a pivotal moment in Mark's gospel. When Jesus leaves her after granting her request, he doesn't return home to his own people. He goes immediately to Decapolis, which is a network of 10 Greek cities, where he heals the deaf man with a speech impediment. You see, this desperate woman's persistence benefited more than just her daughter, because she was instrumental in jump-starting Jesus' ministry to all people. Our authentic response to God's kingdom being heralded in here should be one that acknowledges that there are no external barriers between God and any human being. Not race, class, ethnicity, gender, age, or physical condition. And there should be no barriers between us as human beings either. Once we acknowledge that there are no walls separating any of us, whether physical or otherwise, love and mercy may flow unfettered, and all people will be deemed equally valuable. And at the end of the day, perhaps we need to be reminded that none of us has any right or privilege whatsoever to claim with God. The reality is that we all come as beggars to the table. And it is solely by God's grace that we are fed. And so my prayer today is that we leave here reminded that God's table is immeasurably larger than we can ever imagine, and that we are all invited to the table. Amen.